All right. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Julie Mulvihill, and I am the Executive Director of Humanities Kansas. And I'm just so delighted that you have joined us today for the season kickoff of The Big Idea. Now, The Big Idea is an online program to highlight and inspire fresh thinking in the humanities. And we have a treat for you today. A few housekeeping duties. If you just want to, throughout Dr. Jelks' presentation and conversation with Dr. Mendoza, if you want to put your questions or your comments in the chat box or in the Q&A box, we welcome those. We'll circle back to those throughout the presentation. Definitely get back to those at the end of the presentation. But today's big idea is about democracy in Black America. And we are joined today by Dr. Randal Jelks, the author of the book. And we're going to be talking about his book, Letters to Martin. And I'll let Dr. Mendoza talk a little bit more about that as well. For those of you new to The Big Idea, each big idea begins with some sort of written text, whether it's an essay from the author or the book that we're using today. What we try to do is provide additional resources for all of you who are joining us and others who will join us on Facebook. These are things like films or books, those sorts of resources that can help you spark a conversation about these interesting big idea topics, whether you're with your family and friends around a dinner table or having a special date night or a walk in the woods. This idea that these big ideas change the world, right? And we change the world one mind at a time. So having this common text like the book that Dr. Jelks wrote provides us with a jumping off point to have these conversations. So hopefully some of you had the opportunity to read the book, and if not, I'm sure all of you will be wanting to read it after today's conversation. To begin, I'd like to introduce Dr. Valerie Mendoza, who will interview our special guest. Dr. Mendoza is director of the Title III Strengthening Institutions Grant at Washburn University here in Topeka. She's a native Kansan and earned her PhD in history from the University of California, Berkeley. So welcome, Dr. Mendoza, and I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Julie. Good afternoon, everybody. It is my delight to introduce Randal Maurice Jelks. He is a professor of African and African American Studies and American Studies at the University of Kansas. He's an award-winning author as well as a documentary film producer. And before we got on the Zoom call, he was telling us about his experiences in Hollywood. So maybe we'll hear a little bit more about that. His writings have appeared in the Boston Review, the Los Angeles Review of Books, as well as other national blogs, magazines, and newspapers. His books are The African Americans in the Furniture City, The Struggle for Civil Rights in Grand Rapids, Benjamin Elijah Mays, Schoolmaster of the Movement, and Faith and Struggle in the Lives of Four African Americans, Ethel Waters, Mary Lou Williams, Eldridge Cleaver, and Muhammad Ali. And he recently contributed to a collection of essays titled 42 Today, Jackie Robinson and His Legacy. Today, we are going to talk about his latest book, which is Letters to Martin, Meditations on Democracy in Black America. So welcome, Randal.
Thank you.
How are you today?
I am well, and I hope you are well too.
I am. Thank you so much. So just to start off with, can you tell us a little bit about your book, Letters to Martin? You call these chapters meditations that are meant to kind of weave us together and create community. So that's so intriguing.
So this book started off, I was asked to give a speech at Elmhurst University, just outside of Chicago. Elmhurst University was the school that Reinhold Niebuhr and H. Richard Niebuhr went to school. They were both ethicists, Christian ethicists. H. Richard Niebuhr taught at Yale, Reinhold taught at Union. And Reinhold Niebuhr at one time was one of the most well-known people in the United States throughout the 50s, actually was Time Magazine's Person of the Year. And so I was asked to come to Elmhurst University, and I thought it was because I'm a historian and kind of geeky about these things. I thought, well, this is a great opportunity. But this was shortly after uh, uh, Donald J. Trump was elected to the presidency. And I thought the students at a school like Elmhurst, which has a long history of being a kind of church-related school, not as much anymore today, but at one time in its history. And so I was presuming that students would be gathering who needed to know something about hope and inspiration and concerns about justice. And it was really a well-attended event. And of course, my parents are the Great Depression babies, so I don't know anything about feelings really. And I thought, well, let me talk to these students, these millennials, rising Gen X's, Gen Z's, and talk about King, someone who had been dead 50 years for them, 49 then. And so in a way that they might find something that resonates. So I wrote the talk as a letter that I would give to King, and the students really resonated with it. And that's like, oh, I got an idea here. And maybe I can talk about it more with a more general public. And that's how this began.
Nice. So how has King influenced you throughout your life?
Yeah, that's a good question. As you know, I was born in the city of New Orleans. It's my village. And I'm a boomer, and I was born just as the civil rights movement began to take steam. And the civil rights movement was to every southern town and city, and New Orleans was no different. And my neighborhood, which was um, a working class neighborhood full of working class people to the working poor, was the site of many institutions that helped the New Orleans civil rights movement begin. So, and King in 1957, along with a prominent Baptist minister in New Orleans, Reverend Abraham Lincoln Davis, A.L. Davis, helped to form what was the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in the city of New Orleans. And through my earliest memories, of course, New Orleans was the site where the Freedom Riders wanted to end up at. And so it was, that was all in my conscious and my imagination, even though as a kid, I really was more interested in going out and playing baseball and running around with my friends playing tag than, the civil rights movement. But it was there in front of me, including being a witness to parents yelling at kids about integrating schools, saying 2, 4, 6, 8, we don't want a nigger grade. And that was really shocking, as my mother took me to the parochial school that I attended. So those were real memories and real things. And the New Orleans pool that was near us, the Audubon Park pool, was closed from 1961 to 69 before it would integrate. So these were all real memories for me.
Mm-hmm. And I think you're right about in your book that you went on a visit as a boy to Atlanta. Is that right?
Yeah, the YMCA, um, the YMCA gathered a bunch of boys. The YMCA, in point of fact, in New Orleans was segregated, so this was the colored Y, as they called it. And our leader, Mr. Hughes, gathered all of these boys. We sold candy. I think we must have walked every neighborhood in the city selling candy to go to visit King's initial gravesite, which is not where it is today, to the cemetery where he was born. He thought this would be a good exercise in us learning something about the civil rights movement. And the treat was that finally Six Flags over Georgia, which is in Atlanta, had finally integrated. So that would be our treat at the end. So boys really wanted to sell candy to go on that trip. And for many of us, the first time we ever stayed in a hotel before. It was like, because normally you stay with your relatives wherever they were, and so forth. So it was really exciting, Mr. Hughes, and it was unforgettable because we all committed to this, and this was a great exercise. And he thought we would become civic leaders.
And he wasn't wrong.
No. It sent me on an academic trajectory.
Yeah. So do you have any memories of visiting the site?
Yeah, you know what, the original, the thing that we were struck by, it was so modest. It wasn't like it is today. It was very modest, and we thought, wow, this is a bit modest. But it was a modest, relatively great site, but it was important, and it was about the week of his assassination. So we had spent that whole weekend traveling, and for many of us, for many of my friends, it was first time being outside of Louisiana. I mean, you would go visit your grandparents somewhere, but that was about it. People didn't. It's not like today. Well, we're going on vacation.
Yeah. Well, I had asked you as we were preparing for this discussion today if there was a King speech that spoke to you, right? Particularly in relationship to your book, Letters to Martin. And I felt like you didn't even have to think about it. You just responded immediately with a speech entitled, "Give Us the Ballot." So King gave this speech, and we're just going to play a couple of minute snippets to give the audience an idea of it. This is a lesser known one. Yeah, so I think that's such a great snippet to play, a week or so before we all get ready to vote. So King gave this speech in 1957 at the Lincoln Memorial on the third anniversary of the Brown v. Board decision. And he goes on to talk in the speech further about the need for leadership, both at the federal level, from white Northern liberals, from Southern moderates, and a need for, as he said, quote, "strong, courageous, and intelligent leadership from the Black community." So what is it about this speech that resonated with you that you wanted to share?
Two things. First of all, we always think of "I have a dream," and that's spoken at the Lincoln Memorial. But I always thought this speech was important because he's long before the Voting Rights Act was implemented in 1965. He's already in 67 identifying that it's the vote that really, really counts. And I think in our time, it's not just African Americans who are being excluded. It's a whole subset of people being excluded, whether you're aged or divorced or whatever it is, or a name change. There are ways, manipulations of the ballot to exclude people, and that's not democratic. So I thought immediately, this is really important speech. Of course, we wouldn't talk about it in the same way that someone in 1957 did about men only, but that men, women, all of our citizens deserve to participate in the life of the democracy. So that was really important to me. And sometimes I play the speech for my students, and they're surprised that this issue has come up. And the state of Mississippi still has about a 35%, and I would almost say 40% Black population throughout the state. But there has never been in Mississippi any Black person elected to statewide offices. And of course, this is the continuous manipulation of voting in that state for power.
Yeah, I was really gratified to hear the speech, one, because I didn't know it existed, right? And so I felt like ignorant. but too, the miracles of technology. I mean, just as we were listening to it right now, I was like getting chills and just felt so privileged to be able to hear, him speak.
And it was related to Kansas. It was
Yes.
about Brown v. Board.
Yes.
This was it was about 60,000 people that gathered, 50,000 people that gathered at the Lincoln Memorial that day about Brown v. Board, that it be implemented for all throughout the country.
Yeah, yeah, that part resonated as well. No, thank you. You know what a diehard Kansan I am. So I also, in addition to the speech, I also asked you if there was a photo that you liked, and you chose this one from Bob Fitch, photographer. So we'll get that up there, and I'll let you tell us about that.
I was my uncle had a library, and when I would go over to his house, I would go in the library and see what books he had on the shelf. And I saw a book called The King That God Didn't Save. And I was just thumbing through it and looking at the pictures. And I was shocked as a 13-year-old to see King smoking. And the picture is, it's about 4 o'clock in the morning in the Birmingham airport as he and his Chief Lieutenant Andrew Young, Ambassador Young, former mayor of Atlanta Young, and King's utterly exhausted, and he has a cigarette in his hand. And I was like, wow, this is not a picture you would see in Ebony magazine. And I was like, he looked like, in my opinion, with the exception of the suit on, he looked like men in my community who had worked all day and on the docks and used to sit on the front porch or stoop with a beer, a cigarette, and just trying to have enough energy to keep going. And it gave me some sense of, here is a human person. This is not just a icon. This is a person who's road weary, tired, exhausted, with a cigarette in his hand. If he had a beer, it would like been perfect.
Yeah, so made him relatable to you, instead of this big figure, unknowable kind of.
Right. We see people in public life as though they're not weary, exhausted, fatigued. And this opened up a world that, okay, it takes a lot of energy to be out leading and working people and taking the blame for everything, even if you're on the other side of the country.
Yeah. So let's talk about this notion of democracy that you write about in your book. You call it a belief system that requires faith and aims to confer dignity. And I love those. I love, just all of that verbiage. So can you unpack that for us?
Yeah, I think there, people say they want democracy, but then that means that you have to have some internalized sense of being democratic. That you are going to treat, it's the golden rule, you're going to treat people with dignity and respect, even when you disagree with them, or they disagree with you, that you are going to confer dignity on people, and you're not going to simply be motivated by fear and trying to overpower them because they disagree with you. And that requires some internal fortitude. I call spirituality, spirituality is really from breath. It's about what kind of air we want to breathe. And often we are more enticed by the power, and there's important things to be said about treating power, because that's what democracy is to limit power, so that we don't treat each other badly. But that has to come somewhere inside of someone, and we don't talk about that enough. we talk about the procedural aspects of it, but we don't talk about the aspects of it from where we internalize that sense. Um, and this is part of the problem I think we have in American politics today, that many people are talking about the process. The newspapers talk about the process, but they're never asking the question about internal side of it. And I think this comes from my very Christian upbringing. I mean, that's, I have to say this, is that, our house was religiously, in terms of Christians, it's plural. My grandparents were Baptists, and my neighbors were Catholic, and neighbors were Jewish in the community I lived in. And so, but having a sense of respect that their Sabbath was different than our Sabbath, and a sense of respect for the neighbor and the people I actually saw and lived around, and that was really important. And a sense of, my grandmother used to say, God don't like ugly, and it ain't too particular about pretty, that we're all kind of in this together. And so I would, those are kind of sense that internalized respect for people. And it didn't have anything to do with saying the Pledge of Allegiance. It had everything to do, these were our neighbors, and they deserve respect just as we deserve respect as well.
Yeah, that's one of the things I really like throughout your book, is, you're not talking about democracy as this abstract, notion, right? It's that personal, it's that internal.
And that was important for me to say that, because I think too much is written about from you both and I share our academic sides. Too much is written from kind of large, broad, theoretical, but that's not where people live all the time. And I wanted to talk to where I live, and it was very important. And I was influenced by one book I was influenced by a long time ago. Vincent Harding wrote a book called There's a River, and he really takes up this a history of Black struggle in terms of its spiritual origins. And I thought, and he was a Mennonite, part of the peace tradition, and it's a part and Black. And he wrote King's speech called Beyond Vietnam. And I thought Vincent was an important person to kind of emulate in that regard.
Yeah, and that's kind of a really nice segue for the next thing I wanted to ask you about, because similarly, you talk about, Black creativity as, being born out of slavery and strengthening democracy. And I've never thought of it that way. So can you expand on that?
Yeah. I think that human beings are human beings, no matter who they are. I mean, petty jealousies, resentments, all of this other stuff. But because African Americans were forcibly in a struggle to be protected by state and government and laws, it made a different way of thinking about democracy. And I would dare say there are other groups, the Chinese Americans, Mexican Americans. If you look at the history of lawmaking, laws have been attached to certain groups of people. And so it forces you to think about democracy in a different way, because you're being excluded by the laws that, quote unquote, being democratically enforced, and so forth. That's the whole idea of states' rights, right? Then we have the right to enforce slavery, and And on the other side, he was thinking, no, you don't have the right to enforce human bondage at all. That's not the thing. So we are forced to think about these in different ways, and there are multiple experiences. Women certainly as a group and specific to various communities have to think about it, because all women were excluded.
Yeah. Well, it makes me think of, two famous African-American Kansas creatives, Langston Hughes and Gordon Parks, right? And what I'm thinking of is Gordon Parks, this famous photograph of the cleaning woman, right? Emulating Grant Woods.
Miss
And
Watson. Watson.
yeah. Yeah, and then Hughes's poem, whose title is escaping me right now, but the one where he wants a seat at the table.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, I too sing America.
Yes, thank you. I knew you would know it. Right. And so how they and many others, obviously those are the two that just came to my mind, use their, as you say, creativity to do that piece of strengthening democracy.
And offer critiques, because you use Gordon Parks' picture of Ella Watson, who was a cleaning lady in the Capitol when Black people couldn't vote, right? And he's conferring, just the way that the picture is shot, such a dignity on her, and such authority, that she has as equal right to a voice at the table as anything.
Yeah. And Hughes too, right? Wanting to have that dignity at the table, right? I want to be with you at the table, not eating in the kitchen. Yeah.
Right. And of course, both of them are Kansan. So that which is interesting is that they're both reflecting the simplicity of people's lives, and ordinary working people's lives. They took great pride in reflecting their viewpoints in life.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you can't write letters to Martin without talking about his faith, which you do throughout the book, along with your own. And so this made me think of how faith is sprinkled out through many of your works. Right. So, for example, with Schoolmaster of the movement about Benjamin Mays, who was King's teacher at Morehouse, and then faith and struggle in the lives of 4 Americans. So can you talk kind of a little bit for us about the trajectory of your work, and why do you pick the topics that you pick?
Well, all of them, have to do with, I went to, every one of them I had to go to church archives, with religious archives. I think that we often miss that people are driven by something deeper, and keep them moving. I write briefly about Bayard Rustin, who's openly gay Black man, labor organizer, who organized the March on Washington. He is the organizer behind the scenes, making sure all the buses are there. And he had been out organizing, and he did a preliminary freedom ride, but he also protested nuclear arms because he was a Quaker. And we often forget, we simply say, oh, Bayard is a gay Black man, he's openly gay. And I'm like, yeah, I know a lot of gay people, but I'm not seeing too many go to the Bikini Islands and protest nuclear arms of a country putting in nuclear arms. So what drives Bayard, besides being, and he often talks about in the peace archives at out at Bryn Mawr, and one other schools that I've gone to that comes out of these Quaker traditions. He talks about, I grew up a Quaker, and that meant something to me, and that meant something. He was Black Quakers as well, in that in their household, with his grandmother, then grandmothers have a lot to do with passing on to us. That really meant something, that meant to make your life make a difference. And so I write about faith because I'm interested in and it's people use faith all kinds of ways. But what I discovered is they're struggling for dignity, even when I had very strong feelings about, many of my evangelical friends, and I disagree with them. But I also have a respect that they are putting themselves on the line in ways to convey their point of view, even when I disagree with them, and have respect for them because people put themselves on the line. And the in abolitionism, there's strengths and weakness to that, but most of those were people of faith exercising a more radical faith than the ordinary population because it came from a different place.
Yeah. I did not know that about Rustin. I always learn something new when I talk to you. Thank you. But switching gears a little bit, because I was like reading your book and I got to chapter 3, and I'm like reading the epigraph and I had to pause and I was like, this is a song. Lyrics from a song. And then I went back and I looked and I noticed that all your chapters have start off with song lyrics. So you basically created a playlist for us. And I went back, I kid you not, I listened to all of those songs in order of the chapters, and you have to get Randal's book so you can see what songs he picked, because he has really good taste in music, everybody. So talk to me a little bit about that process. Where did the inspiration for that come from, and why those songs?
Well, I stole it from W.E.B. Du Bois, Souls of Black Folks. He begins with all of these hymns, and I'm like, that's Du Bois. He's gonna sort of be up there in the clouds. And I wanted to take songs that I thought people were listening to, popular songs, and think about those from hymns to other things as a way of beginning, because it's a soundtrack of the 60s and 70s, and people are listening to music, and I wanted to make sure that got included, because I think that is an important part. I mean, the only woman to speak at the March on Washington, really, or have a starring role, is Mahalia Jackson. And so I wanted to make sure we had all kinds of music there. And I think music, as you and I think about cultural history all the time, it's important. People's music comes along with them. You can't think about organizing without music, and that's really important.
Yeah. And just for you all listening, this it's a wide range. It's everything from Gil Scott-Heron to Missy Elliott to Billie Holiday. So it's completely awesome. So you have to check it out. All right.
Thank you for bringing that up.
No, I loved it. So you end your book by saying that we must, quote, search for some ultimate goodness that sustains the sanctity of our lives together. We must internalize the spirit of democracy. Do you have any suggestions for us on how to do that?
Well, by working on our common struggles. Listen, we were talking earlier, the aquifer in Kansas has about 50 years, and it's not just Kansas, of course. It goes all the way to Nebraska. And that's a common problem we all have to get together and work on, and ask the questions of how we want to treat the earth. That's a common problem. And if the water dries up in this region, we're all going to be affected. So ways that we talk about that. And we have to talk about living on the earth in a way different than the industrial revolution style ways, that we could overpower the earth and live more creatively. Kansans, we suffered through the Dust Bowl. Now, young people are not old enough to remember that terrible ecological instance of Kansas suffering through the Dust Bowl, but we ought to be able to come together and say, you know what, we're going to have to manage water better. We're going to have to treat it better. Maybe we want to get more tall grass growing again and all of that stuff. And that's the real struggle. So people of faith at least have that common ground to come together and think about things. We're such a pitched battle right now, and this is what I want to address. We're such a pitched battle that we don't take the time to step back, and that's why I call these meditations. You asked me that earlier, but meditations and letters also force you to step back and think about what you're trying to say and what you're trying to do. And that's what I want to get people, take a step back and breathe and then figure out what we can do together instead of like all the attack ads we see on the televisions right now.
Yes, yes.
So
So
very tiresome.
yeah. So again, I'll invite audience to, put questions in the chat or in the Q&A. So what are you working on now?
Well, I was hoping to be working on a book about Langston Hughes. I really, this book, I had to get a literary agent for this book, and she wanted me to write a couple more books on democracy, and Hughes is one of them because I've been working on a documentary film about Hughes, and so I had to read a lot of literature scholars who I disagree with, by the way, all the time. Sometimes I think, oh, they got this all wrong. It's a about around the theme of Hughes, around the theme of joy of democratic living, because Hughes really captures ordinary people and brings them joy. They're not the they're not the elite. They're not former presidents. So I would like to do that. And then I'm going to go to, I'm hoping at least all goes well, go to Zambia this summer for a conference, and in a collection of essays, why they should not be a Wakanda forever. That's the name of my talk.
Nice. Oh, okay. Well, I look forward to learning more about that. We do have a comment in the chat for you that said that thanking you because you were very inspiring today. So I agree. Another comment, maybe question. So letters in general are designed to be so personal, from me to you or you to me. And it covers so much of what your book covers so much of what you expect to find in letters, right? Hopes, stories of love, frustrations, current events. Were you surprised by what came out when you sat down to write?
Yeah, I was I as I tried to outline stuff that I was wanting to write about. I had to be, what it was surprising, I had to be more honest about myself in many ways. And so that was a real exercise. You can't write a letter and not be fully honest about yourself and so forth. So yeah, that was the real learning lessons here. Also, COVID was wonderful for me. I hate to say it, but I was, I could be buried down in since nobody was moving, and just plow away. And that was, I see why monks got a lot of writing done.
Yeah, and that's one thing I did notice about your book as well, because you and I are friends, right? And so I know some of your story, and then I got to read it all over again. That very personal,
Yeah.
personal nature. So that was a treat as well. And I could kind of see also where you were also with your grandboys. There's that undertone in there.
Yeah. Well, thinking about them for the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thinking about them for the future.
That's
Because we all want a space where your son, my two grandsons, they'll have a space to live and be respected and have love. That's ultimately what everybody wants, I think. And I would hope that we keep making a world like that, keep pointing in that direction. We, may not be the best examples, and they all have better ideas. But as I tell my freshman students, somebody will walk over your grave and say, what did they do with their time here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's a beautiful, beautiful work.
Yeah.
We appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, if we don't have any more questions, I just want to come back on and say thank you, Dr. Jelks, for being with us today and for writing this book. And thank you to Dr. Mendoza for leading us in such a wonderful conversation. And my last thanks would go to those of you who are watching and listening to this program. We're just really grateful this idea that you're joining us in this movement of ideas that we're trying to bring across the state, and we're really happy that you joined us. We are getting ready to do a couple of more things that you might be interested in. So be sure and mark your calendar for December 1st at noon. We're inviting Dr. Kim Warren from the University of Kansas to join us to honor the 200th anniversary of Harriet Tubman and to use the lens of civil rights and social reform to really take a deep dive into the impact of this particular individual in American history. But I also want to just share with you that Humanities Kansas is also bringing a Smithsonian Traveling Institution exhibition to Kansas in 2023. It opens in March of 2023 in Dodge City. And the topic of this traveling exhibition is Voices and Votes, Democracy in America. And boy, for the kickoff of the Big Idea season and knowing that we're leaning into this idea of voices and votes, today's presentation was just exactly what we needed to be reflecting on our own personal journeys with democracy and how we can, as Randal says, really face our fears and stand up for what's important. So we look forward to sharing more about this idea of voices and votes throughout the next year and a half, and we're just really grateful that you joined us today. And with that, we'll say goodbye.
Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you.